Friends, today I have two stories for you, and in both cases, mothers took the lives of their children. We start with the case of Susan Eubanks. This took place in October 1996 in California. If you do end up liking, please subscribe. She had been living with her boyfriend, Reen Dodson, and her nephew in a small home in San Marcos. Susan and her first husband, John Armstrong, had one son. His name was Brandon. Following her divorce from Armstrong, Susan married Eric Eubanks. She was pregnant at that time with her child Austin. He was the child of a man named Larry Shoebridge, with whom she had been living. You already seen a pattern here? Man after man after man. Eric fathered two of Susan's sons. Their names were Brigham and Matthew. After Susan's brother died, Susan obtained custody of her nephew. Each son had been shot in the head by the same 5-shot 38 caliber revolver. At the time of their deaths, Austin and Brigham had a zero point zero 0.02 micrograms of Xanax in their blood. Why Xanax? What on earth happened? In the living room, Susan had put the revolver to the temple of 14-year-old Brandon and shot him. She also shot him in the neck from a few inches away. She shot her younger sons in their bedroom. With the revolver no more than a foot from Austin's head, she shot her 7-year-old son near his left eye. With the gun inches from Brigham's head, she shot her 6-year-old son twice, once above his left ear and once close to his right ear. With the gun close to the head of 4-year-old Matthew, she shot him in the top of the head, leaving stippling marks on his face. She fired other bullets in the bedroom that hit the wall and a window. At some point in the bedroom, Susan opened the revolver cylinder, removed the 5 expanded shell casings, put them in a trash can, and reloaded the 5-shot revolver. Her 6-year-old nephew was at home at the time of the shootings. He was found unharmed, in bed, with blankets pulled up to his chin. So the question remains, why did she do it? Well, keep listening. Deputies who entered the home shortly after the shooting found 5 notes on Susan's bedroom floor, all in Susan's handwriting. One of the notes was to Eric. She wrote, "You betrayed me. You kept a diary, and you and Reen Dodson conspired against me." She added, "I've lost time for you to do the same everyone I've ever loved." She said he could use any money from her workers' disability care to bury the kids and find your rainbow. So maybe from these scribblings, she's complaining that men have let her down. Surely the answer to that is not to take the lives of your children, though. In a note to Dodson, Susan wrote he was the biggest liar to date that she knew. She went on to say, "Stay on crystal meth and let your 37-year-old ass move back with mom and dad. Get back with Pam and or Sherry. They are your class." It concluded by saying, "See ya, ha ha." A third letter was to Brandon's father. It said, "I know you'll hate me forever, but I can't let Brandon live without his brothers, so I did what I did." She wrote she had been strong for 25 years and that I'm tired of all the fight and hurt. She ended the note by complaining that Dodson fucked me all up. Susan wrote to her niece and her sister apologizing for her actions. To the niece, Susan explained, "I know what I'm doing is going to hurt you tremendously, but I can't and have no desire to go on." To her sister, Susan wrote she was tired of being strong and that things were way out of hand. Susan included Matthew's birth date and hers and asked her sister to ensure that the two of them would be in the same casket. That's kind of like throwing it in your sister's face. You're going to take the child's life and, in a sense, want to be buried in the same place? What? Now, besides the evidence and the crimes themselves and the aforementioned notes, the prosecution presented the following evidence regarding events that preceded the crimes. You see, the Eubanks marriage appeared stable until Susan experienced job related injuries that required surgery. She then began to abuse prescription medications and alcohol. She lost her job, and she and her husband Eric began a recurring pattern of separation and reconciliation. The police found more than 50 bottles of prescription medications in Susan's home after the murders. In the fall of 1997, the Eubankses were going through a divorce and Eric moved out of their South Twin Oaks home. Susan and Reed Dodson had an intimate relationship on and off since they met in 1994. Dodson moved into Susan's house after Eric moved out. From October the 13th to 19th, Dodson left Susan's house and Eric moved back in. It's like she's playing relationship musical chairs, because a short time later, Eric moved out and Dodson returned. This cheeky minx, eh? Now, about 10 days before the murders, Susan purchased replacement deadbolt locks for her house. Appearing angry, she told a clerk, who knew Dodson, that he had broken the lock on her door and she was buying new ones so he could not enter or get his fucking stuff. Susan told the clerk to warn Dodson that she just purchased bullets at a nearby store and one had his name on it. Susan then asked one of the kids that she was with, "Mummy did buy the bullets, didn't she? Didn't she?" Dodson testified Susan once told him that if she was pushed far enough, she would kill her children. The afternoon of October the 26th, the day of the murders, Brandon stayed home to watch his siblings and Susan's nephew, while Susan and Dobson went to a bar to watch football. The couple ordered a pitcher of beer and soon were joined by another couple. Susan did not want the woman to sit with them due to a confrontation they had had when she had criticized Susan for talking about Dodson behind his back. Dodson decided he and Susan should go to a different bar. Susan argued with Dodson when they left, complaining he had taken the other woman's side. She slapped Dodson a few times while he was driving. Dodson then decided to drive home. When Susan realized they were not going to another bar, she slammed the minivan into its parking gear while they were traveling 30 miles per hour on a freeway off ramp. Susan removed the keys from the ignition, but Dodson eventually was able to retrieve them and drive home. Once home, the couple continued to argue in their bedroom. When Dodson said he wanted to leave and move to Hawaii, Susan slapped him. She took his keys, blocked his exit from the room, and ripped out the telephones. Eventually, they calmed down and they had sex. As I said, cheeky minx. Dodson then said he was going to watch television in the living room. Instead, when Susan was in another part of the house, Dodson ran to a nearby gas station, called the sheriff's department, and asked that they send a deputy to stand by so he could retrieve his belongings and truck from Susan's home. Imagine that scene. They get into an argument, then they have sex. Then she's watching TV and he bolts it. He escapes. How crazy must she have been for him to do that? While Susan and Dodson were fighting, Brandon had gone to a pay telephone and called Kathy Goobs, the mother of his best friend. He asked her to come get him and the other boys because his brothers were scared and Brandon did not want them exposed to the fighting. Kathy told Brandon to go home, reassess the situation, and to call again if he still needed her to pick them up. A short time later, Susan called Kathy, pleading for Kathy to come take the boys. During the trial, Kathy testified that she spoke to Susan, who, though upset and agitated, did not sound intoxicated. Susan said she feared Dodson would call the police and that if they came, they would take and separate the children. Kathy agreed to pick up the boys but never left to get them. Now, Deputy Sheriff Daniel Deese picked up Dodson at the gas station. As they approached Susan's house, she was carrying Dodson's tools away from his vehicle, which had two flat tires and broken headlights. When Deese told Susan to drop the tools, she became confrontational and claimed Dodson owed her money and had sexually assaulted her. She went inside after Deese threatened to arrest her. While Dodson was putting his tools in the patrol car, Susan came outside yelling, "I've been screwed by men my whole life. I've been beaten. I've been assaulted." And that goes back to my earlier point. Did she do this out of bitterness? As Dodson left with Deese, they saw Eric parked nearby. Kathy had paged Eric and advised him of the calls from Susan and Brandon, and Eric had come to check on the children. He saw the police car and was waiting for it to drive away because Susan had a restraining order against him. Back inside her house, Susan telephoned Brandon's grandfather and then called Armstrong in Texas. She told Armstrong the police had been there investigating the incident with her boyfriend in which she had slashed his tires. broken his windshields, and put sugar in his gas tank. Wait, what? And then she feared Child Protective Services would come to take the children. She said she needed Armstrong to tell Brandon to stick by me on this one, even if it means lying. When Eric arrived at Kathy's home after 6 p.m., he had her listen to a voicemail he just received in which Susan simply said, "Say goodbye." At 6:30 p.m., Eric called the sheriff's office and asked to speak with Deputy Deese. About 7 p.m., the two connected. When Eric mentioned the message and his concern that Susan had a handgun at the house, Deese instructed him to request a welfare check of Susan's residence. Now, during the trial itself, a crime scene expert reconstructed what they saw. These experts confirmed that Susan first shot Brandon twice in the living room, next shot Austin once, and then fired twice in the direction of Matthew but missed. The expert, whose name was Rod Englert, testified Susan reloaded her revolver at that point and then shot Brigham twice, fired a shot between Brigham and Matthew, and then shot Matthew once. An ex boyfriend of Susan's, Larry Shoebridge, also testified that an old girlfriend contacted him in 1989 while he and Susan were romantically involved and living together. Larry went on to say that when Susan found out he was contacted by an ex, she put a gun to his head and said, well, she can do whatever she wants, and that she would kill him. And at that point, Larry decided to leave. But yeah, you put a gun to someone's head, mate, they're gonna get the fuck out of there. Fearing Susan's reaction to his decision, he moved out after she had gone to work. Again, goes back to what I said earlier. She's in the living room, and her man at the time bolts it. In the case of Larry, she had gone to work, and then he bolts it. Like, if you want to leave someone, just leave. No. They had to time it because they actually feared for their life. You see what I'm saying? After Susan discovered where Shoebridge was living, she drove up to his house. Susan screamed at Shoebridge and tried to attack his female friend. Susan eventually drove off, screeching her tires. Also in the trial, Brandon's relatives and friends testified about the impact Brandon's death had on their lives. The paternal grandmother mentioned 2 incidents in which she believes Susan had abused Brandon. Teachers and coaches also testified about the impact the boys' deaths had on them. Linda Smith, Susan's sister, testified regarding a telephone call she received from Susan, in which she said she once had rubbed her nephew's face in a dirty diaper after she learned he had hidden the diaper behind his bed. When Smith became angry with her, Susan changed her story and said she only had made her nephew smell the diaper as punishment. Now, regarding the defense in the trial, they presented evidence that Susan's mother and stepfather were alcoholics and abused her when she was young. They constantly fought and had affairs, basically trying to make a picture, well, this was learned behavior. Susan's mother abused her by slapping her and dragging her by her hair. Susan's mother died in a house fire when Susan was 8 years old. Susan then was rotated among relatives, including an aunt who abused her, and a relative who managed a hotel and had Susan and her siblings clean its rooms. Susan sometimes lived with her stepfather in a trailer, where he would get drunk and urinate on himself. The defense presented testimony from relatives and Susan's co-workers that Susan's number one concern was her children, that she was proud of them and very caring, and that she was an excellent employee, and that she did well in the courses she took to become a medical office insurance biller after becoming disabled from a job-related back injury. Relatives and friends who testified that Susan was tortured during her childhood and that she was a loving parent asked the jury not to impose the death penalty. The children's former pediatrician testified Susan regularly brought her sons to him for checkups and medical problems. Eric Eubanks testified about his marriage and family life with Susan. He said he still have some love feelings for her. A correctional consultant testified that Susan would not be a future danger if sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. The defense also presented evidence through the testimony of Dr. Clark Smith, who was board certified in addiction and forensic psychiatry. The fact that Susan received infusions of saline and other fluids while in the ambulance would have affected the alcohol content of the blood drawn from her at the hospital. Although that blood sample revealed a 0.07% blood alcohol content, and a toxicologist had calculated that Susan's blood alcohol content at the time of the murders was 0.09%, Dr. Smith testified that Susan's blood alcohol content at the time of the murders would have been closer to 0.19%. He testified the infusions given to Susan similarly would have affected the level of Valium found in her blood. He said that the alcohol and drug levels in Susan's blood at the time of the shootings would have produced a very significant effect on her brain and would have affected her emotions, perceptions, judgment, and other higher brain functions. Dr. Venus Fieler, the toxicologist who had estimated that Susan's blood alcohol content was 0.09% at the time of the murders, was called as a rebuttal expert witness to refute Dr. Clark's conclusions. She testified that she had based her calculations on formulae published in recognized literature and that she formed her opinion that liquid intravenous infusions into the body do not affect blood alcohol or drug concentrations in the manner claimed by Dr. Smith, based on literature on dilutions and her personal experience while working at the coroner's office. So she knows what she's doing. So to conclude, Susan Eubanks had took the lives of her sons as a result of rage. The rage was a result of anger felt towards their fathers and the boyfriend whom had chosen to leave her. It was claimed that she felt the desire to seek revenge for the failure of the relationships, that she wanted the fathers to also know the pain of losing those that had been loved. And in October of 1999, Susan Eubanks was sentenced to death. If you look at this objectively, you could say she had anger issues and she had a fear of rejection. So the moment someone pushed her away, she did not know how to handle it and she lashed out. But on the streets, they would simply say, "This was just a crazy bitch." She's still currently on California's death row. We now move on to the story of Patricia Blackmon. On May the 29th, 1999, Patricia telephoned emergency 911, calling paramedics to her mobile home in Dothan, Alabama. She told the 911 operator that her child was not breathing. Eddie Smith, a paramedic in Dothan, testified that he arrived at Blackmon's mobile home at around 9:30 p.m. and that he found Dominica lying on the floor of the master bedroom. She was wearing only a diaper and blood-soaked socks, was covered in vomit and was not breathing. There was a hematoma on her forehead and blood on her chest. After the paramedics attempted to revive her, she was transported to Flowers Hospital emergency room. Dr. Matthew Christer testified that he treated Dominica when she was brought to the emergency room. He said that he first established an airway, but that at 10:22 p.m., she was pronounced dead. Dominica was 2 years old. Dominica's pediatrician, Dr. Robert Head, was also called to the emergency room. Both doctors testified that the child had multiple bruises and contusions and an imprint of the sole of a shoe on her chest. They also said they observed marks from previous injuries on her body. Dr. Alfredo Paredes, the medical examiner who conducted the autopsy, testified that Dominica died of multiple blunt force injuries to her head, chest, abdomen, and extremities. He detailed some 30 injuries that he discovered on the child's body. Dr. Paredes testified, and I'm going to read out his full statement. Listen to this. He said she had bruises in the front part of her lower chest and upper abdomen, bruises around the right groin. She had a fracture. This is the fracture of the leg. And on her side, she had bruises on the left temporal area above the ear. She had a bruise on the right cheek area. She had a bruise on the side of the heel and foot area. Then on the back, she had multiple bruises on the lower back bilaterally. On both sides, that means. Bruises of the buttocks, bruises behind the knee area and below the knee area. There were numerous injuries with the pale area in between the left buttock area. That's just sickening. Paredes also said that Dominica had 2 broken bones and many other injuries that were in various stages of healing. He said that Dominica had also an imprint of the sole of a shoe on her chest. Dr. James Downs, the chief medical examiner for the state of Alabama, testified that he compared the sandals Blackmon was wearing on the day of the murder with the scan image of the victim's chest, and it was his opinion that the imprint on Dominica's chest was consistent with the sole of the sandals. Downs also testified that it was his opinion that Dominica's recent injuries were consistent with having been made by a pool cue. There was testimony indicating that Blackmon had adopted Dominica approximately 9 months before she was killed. Testimony also showed that Blackmon had sole charge of the child from the time her father in law saw the two of them earlier on the evening of the murder until the time of the child's death. To confirm, the murder took place on May the 29th, 1999. Wayne Johnson, Blackmon's father in law, testified that on the night Dominica was killed, he saw Dominica and she was playing and acting normal. He said that Blackmon and Dominica left his house at around 8 p.m. A search of Blackmon's mobile home revealed several blood splattered items. Forensic tests revealed the presence of blood on a broken pool cue, a child's t shirt, a pink flat bedsheet, a kilt, and two napkins. The blood matched Dominica's blood. Blackmon called several witnesses to testify in her defense. Judy Watley, an employee of the Department of Human Resources, said that she had contact with Dominica and Blackmon once a month for 5 months before August 98 and that she noticed that the two had a good relationship. Eventually, on June the 7th, 2002, Patricia was sentenced to death. It's just childish behavior. I know the murders are beyond childish, that's not the right word to put it. I'm talking about her reasons. Yeah, okay, someone wants to leave. Let them leave. You're not a child. What the hell is wrong with you? And it seems in the case of Patricia, she adopted the girl, but then with all the abuse, it seems that she was just angry that she had a child that she had to attend to rather than having all the freedom to do whatever she wanted. I guess in both cases, these women did not understand the gift of children. Comment, tell me what you think.